Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Thomas Berrington, CIO of French Brothers Homes. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where CyberLink's intrusion detection comes in. With our 24/7 security operations center, we use a combination of AI and cybersecurity technicians to see when a hacker's successfully bypassed your security. So if a bad guy gets past your security, we'll know right away and be able to kick them out. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Thomas, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about French Brothers Homes and your role there as CIO?
Absolutely. So French Brothers Homes is a production home builder in New Mexico. We're the second largest builder here in New Mexico. We're doing about 200 production homes a year. And my role as CIO is really responsible for all of the data integration, making sure all of our information is available to the decision makers and to the people creating the data, that they have a seamless experience in inputting data.
Fantastic. Well, 200 homes a year, that's a sizable operation. That is no longer just throwing up a home, and a builder can do a few homes a year, but 200, that's impressive.
Yeah, we really started getting into that space where it really becomes about information system management. Home builders that are kind of in that 50 to 100 home range really can still manage on Excel spreadsheets or Post-it notes. Once you start getting beyond that, the inefficiencies and the amount of administrative time that it takes to manage that without a dedicated IT director, CIO, data analyst type role, it just becomes cost prohibitive.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit, because I think historically that industry has not been quick to kind of adopt technology. Builders, they build, and I think it's understandable. So let's talk about the CIO role in the industry. So I think that's a relatively new thing, but I'm going to let you tell us all about it.
Yeah, so I think for some of the largest builders in the industry, kind of the top seven, the publicly traded companies that have the backing have probably had that role for a while. But for most in the industry that are kind of privately held, small to medium sized builders doing 20 to 150 to 200 homes a year, they've traditionally just been kind of that mom and pop startup, the good old boys type deals, where it's they know construction, they know how to build a home. They know how to sign deals and get trades and stuff into the homes, but managing projects at scale and thinking about kind of the business scalability side of things has really just come into play in the last few years, as development and IT costs have come down, as IT interest has ramped up as well. Builders are now starting to really realize, we hold a lot of data. It's important for us to use that data to improve our quality processes. And, how do we manage that while still managing our operations, managing our sales, maintaining warranty? It requires a dedicated person to really, maintain those integrations and move beyond the Excel spreadsheets and the Post-it notes so that you have a structured plan.
Absolutely. So let's I really love kind of the diverse backgrounds that people come from to get to IT. And I think that's always really interesting for people to hear, because I think in a lot of people's heads, if you aren't some Uber hacker at 16 hacking into the Pentagon, you likely have no business in, or you're going to struggle in tech. And I think that's a bit of a misconception. And we've had guys who were like truck drivers that transitioned to IT, and now they've made their way to CIO. And so Can you walk us through kind of your background and your transition to CIO and how and kind of how that worked with the industry as well? And so the kind of that trajectory and path that you took.
Absolutely. So, what really, I kind of in a past life, I came into the IT field from the food service industry. I was managing a restaurant group, and my kind of first introduction, I'd say, to information systems or to IT was in developing the POS system for that. It was a cloud-based POS system, and that was really what kind of had me do my first thought process on system structure and making sure all the menu items were built out correctly and everything else. Um, and I did that for a number of years. And the restaurant industry is just a really tough industry to stay in. This was prior to COVID, and it was just kind of a turning point in my life where I decided that it wasn't something I wanted to do long term. It worked out well given just before COVID. So I got out of the restaurant industry and got back into or went for my master's and got into IT. Was doing some database management stuff there based on that POS programming. And while I was finishing my master's, I came on with French Brothers as a data analyst. They were kind of in that transition of becoming a 200 home builder and realizing the Excel spreadsheets they were using were just taking a lot of time to produce, and the data was immediately out of date, and they needed to find a more efficient way to manage their systems. So they brought me on as a data analyst, which my first task was really moving from Excel to Power BI and dynamic reporting. From there, we started getting into, well, here's the data that we have out of the system. There's a lot of data we're still missing. Well, how do we optimize those processes? And I was, moved into a director of IT role and started getting into development of here's all of our auxiliary data that doesn't exist within our ERP system, and let's systematically store this data so that we can use it more effectively. And now, just from the beginning of this year, moving into the CIO role, it's strategically how do we look 3 to 5 years down the road now that we're establishing our data environment? How are we going to utilize that as an asset through things like machine learning of our image database, plan analysis for waste inefficiencies or waste analysis. And it really requires that clean, efficient data estate to be able to move into that kind of analysis.
Yeah, no, I mean it really does, and it's a big jump. Going from kind of that Excel spread, everything running on Excel spreadsheet to an ERP. So were you part of putting in the ERP, or was the ERP already there, and then it was integrating the data, analysis portion to that and moving to Power BI, or how did that work for you guys?
So the ERP system was already in place when I was here. We had been on it for a number of years. It was not being used to its max efficiency, and we had a number of processes that had been converted during our time on the ERP system. So trying to pull reports from the system became very convoluted, and it was this, well, we pull the data from this system to then manipulate it and do our kind of transformation process to then generate a report where a lot of that repetition could have been handled through kind of our ETL process. So yeah, but just getting that cleaned up.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, no, that is such a huge step, and it's really tough for a lot of businesses to kind of get to. So were you you're the first CIO there at French Brothers? You kind of you were the first?
Yes, yeah, first in the technology department. Now we brought more people under it, but prior to me being on, French Brothers didn't have a technology department.
Nah, that's great. I mean, I love that whole progression, as small business kind of grow and the people get to grow with it. I think that's really kind of the ideal solution. I think far too often it doesn't end up working out that way, to where people, to kind of grow, they end up having to leave a company to go to another spot where they can grow. So it's great to hear a company like French Brothers being able to grow and give the people in the company the ability to grow with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've done in the past year, actually, through various builder groups and with some of the you builders around the country that haven't adopted a technology department or somebody to lead their information structure. We've worked with a number of different builders and either helped bring on a data analyst with them in their hiring process, or when they've gone through that process, we've kind of demoed, here's what we've implemented in the first 18 months or 24 months of having that role established. That may not be identical for what they're doing, but it gives them a close enough kind of industry related foothold within their company.
That's great. So let me ask you, so data analysis seems to be a big part of what you're doing there, and kind of the value that you're adding as CIO. Was that something that intrigued you earlier when you were doing your POS kind of development, or was that something you got into in your master's, or was it something that just was required and you jumped in, you were like, all right, this is what needs to be done. Let me roll up my sleeves and get good at this.
No, so it really came through in my MBA program. My focus was in data analytics, and I had a couple phenomenal professors. I went through NMSU, New Mexico State University. Go Aggies if you're out there. But I had a couple great professors that their mentality. When you're looking at data, there's really three states of data. It's descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. And having that mentality, when we're looking at descriptive data, right? You're thinking about weather data. That's going to tell you what the weather was yesterday, what the weather was last week, what the temperature was, 2 hours ago. Predictive data, well, we know typically winter is cold, summer is hot. We can predict that. And then prescriptive, we know on Wednesday it's going to rain, you should wear a raincoat. When you start looking at kind of those definitions of data and how you're using the data to progress from just describing it to being able to use it to tell you what you should be doing going forward, it really allows you to kind of get into business planning and get into strategy, which is ultimately where I'd like to be progressing forward, and being in that CIO role. I know have that ability to kind of look at strategy. And then it's kind of the other key terminology, it seems like, in data analysis is data-driven decisions. And our company has really taken to that wholeheartedly. It's, let's blend data with experience and make data-driven decisions. Most of our leadership team have been in the industry now for a while. They have the knowledge of the market, and now we're able to back up kind of gut feelings with the data. So using that has really progressed us forward and allowed us to make decisions a lot faster.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let me ask you, you'd mentioned Power BI earlier. Is that kind of I'm assuming that is what you guys are using now and will continue to use moving forward?
Yeah, that would be so Microsoft's our main cloud provider. We're also with a few other companies for our CRM, for our ERP system. But in integrating those, we've really taken the approach that all reporting will be done through Power BI. It simply integrates really cleanly with our team's work OS, with our web interface for the people in the field. And it's just a very clean system with our Microsoft 365 licensing.
Yeah, no, Power BI is fantastic. So let me ask you, do you have some kind of lessons learned or things that you just absolutely love about Power BI that you want to share?
I think the most important thing is having a clean data model going into, if you structure your data model correctly to begin with, there are so many reports that can be built off of a single model versus having to kind of go through that formation and framework stage repeatedly. If you get that, you spend a lot of time on the front end and do the extract, transform, load process, and really get kind of clean tables. It allows your analysts down the line to really create reports super efficiently, very quickly. And then they're just focusing on how do we diffuse this information effectively as possible, rather than how do we clean and where do we get this information from.
Love it. Let me ask you. I think AI is on everybody's mind these days, and rightfully so. So let me ask you, where do you see AI playing a role in terms of French brothers in terms of data analytics, kind of moving forward? And is that something that you guys are currently doing or looking to do?
So yeah, AI is obviously on everybody's radar right now. Some of the things that we've been looking at that would best suit our use case, obviously the chat GPT feature of it. We send out customer notifications, weekly customer notifications. And a lot of times people in the field will just write a real quick sentence or two. Sometimes it's not as descriptive as it would like, or if there's spelling errors, punctuation errors. So just running that through and, let's rephrase this in a professional tone from a builder to a new homeowner. That's a simple prompt, and it just improves every one of our builders' communications to, with minimal effort. Kind of the next thing going on that we're looking at is, as we amass kind of our image database collection of our homes in progress and our completed homes. We're starting to run machine learning on them so that we can look for anomalies like outlets out of place, or if they're missing shutters, or anything that the quality assurance may pick up. But right at the moment, if we can take that picture and it can call it out, well, then we don't have to wait for the quality assurance. We can notice it as that task is completed, and try and speed up that quality assurance process. And maybe the trades are still on site, they haven't left, and we're not having to reschedule them. Some of the other stuff with some of our semi-custom projects that'll be looking at, well, how do we use AI to optimize scheduling for those projects? It's not a production product, so it's not a schedule that's going to be set in stone. So we'll have to look at all the trades availability and how do we use AI to schedule that with max efficiency. So those are really kind of the areas where we see it getting in place.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think in that semi-custom home and custom home area, I think that would be phenomenal. I don't know if anybody's working on that, not my field, but I think that's I think that would be phenomenal. I mean, when we had our our house built, it was a custom home, and it, of course, not that does not go as planned, right? And it's difficult to, right, because there's so many variables. It's custom. It's that home has never been built before, so you discover things. There's decisions that have to be made. I think that would be absolutely fascinating to see AI play a role in planning that out and streamlining it. That'd be phenomenal. Is there?
Yeah, we're hoping for good results with that. So
Is that something that somebody's, do you know if anybody's working on that currently, or is that, that's something you can use, like Grok 3 or Chat GPT or anything that's out there in some way to do that? Or is, what's the current state of that?
so it's really in its infancy. We're using just kind of a Gantt chart analysis, being able to run project schedules with estimated dates within them through really through Copilot, not through ChatGPT,
Copilot, yeah.
keeping it internally. But then we're able to kind of analyze those schedules and put it in a Gantt chart that maximizes these based on these parameters of successor and predecessor activities.
Yeah. Copilot has been yeah, it's been really great in ways. And I look forward to seeing how it, continues to progress as it, as they work through and integrate it more into the Microsoft, kind of ecosystem. But I think it's been a huge help to a lot of small and medium businesses. I don't know about the larger ones. I know that they've kind of got their own. A lot of them use their own GPTs, throughout the larger organizations, and they train it up, and that's great. But I think Copilot's done such a great job. How are you guys using Copilot? I mean, I know you just gave one example, but are you using it kind of throughout, for everybody, or is it just, kind of a management only kind of thing at this point?
Yeah, right now it's still just a management only. We're slowly rolling it out, given that I'm sure a lot of small and medium businesses are in that same state where, our information may not be as structured or secured as we need it to be before we implement Copilot. And we, even if it's only looking at internal data, we don't want the wrong people to have access to, hey, what was our net income? What was the owner's share? So we want to make sure we have that locked down prior to a company-wide rollout. But from an executive standpoint, we're really using it, obviously, and with it being such a project-based industry, there's a lot of email communication and scheduling and stuff like that. So just making sure that our management is able to kind of digest their daily inbox in an efficient way, particularly around a particular home or around a project. If something comes up and a home's complete, we can quickly ask, hey, summarize all the communication we've had on this project through email, or we're also using it now for some of our budgeting and stuff like that, running through our budgets to make sure that we're within our percentages and kind of internal analysis that way. But
Yeah.
it seems like there's still a lot of potential there. We're just scratching the surface from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I think it's really quite fascinating where we are currently with, with AI's assistance, if you will, as a tool. And I think where it's going to be kind of in the not too distant future. I think it's a really exciting time. I know that a lot of people get very concerned and worried, that it's going to replace jobs. And it's funny because we just recently had, in fact, last week we had somebody on the show. It'll air in a couple months, but we had a group on. They are a Web 3.0 company, and it's Grove. They do this. It's very, very cool company, but they had about 70 developers. And then thanks to AI, they are down to 7 developers, down from 70 some, right? So they basically their 7 developers are now far more efficient and better than they were with 70 people, which I think is both fascinating and what needs to happen, right? But it's also a little scary for if you're one of the 70 who were let go. I know there's a balance, and I always take the perspective of, well, they should be, those 70 that got let go, they should be using those tools, and when they go to their next firm will be invaluable because they are going to be using AI, and they're going to be one of the 7 left. I think from if you zoom out and look at the whole picture, then that should mean that there will be more opportunities. More companies need to start, and more companies can start, but they'll be smaller. So I get that puts people who want a larger, more stable business, they want to work for a bigger company because they think that'll give them more stability and longevity. Maybe, but I think that's the issue for people now, is that we're in an economy and a state where things transition quickly. Technology allows us to, and people have to move quickly, right? We have to stay up with technology and learn and stay. So all that to say, or to ask, I should say, as CIO, I think that there is so much to learn and stay up on. It is quite the challenge today, for a CIO. Whereas I think you rewind 20 years ago, you could be the subject matter expert on all things technology. Like, you got it going on. The internet's just coming out. You know all about the internet. You can put up web pages. You're on it, right? Today, get out of here. You can be a generalist in a lot of stuff. You got to understand the strategies, the tools, how they work, but you cannot be the subject matter expert in all things anymore. So, for you, how does this play out, and how do you deal with that kind of, that technology and that stress and that, the fast-paced nature of it all?
Yeah, for me, I think it's important to remember, it seems like the foundation of all technology is structure. So having that at the base of your education and continuing education is so important. My undergrad degree was in information systems. So I think that's been helpful. It's not computer science. So some of the programming languages and everything else, I haven't gotten bogged down and tied to, Python or C++ or Java or anything else. I've focused just on the structure and we're looking at data, SQL and all of the different data structures and dynamics that are there. But it's, whether it's machine learning or AI or a different programming language, all of it entails, on data architecture for an organization, and how can you best utilize that, whether you're building models, whether you're trying to integrate with other systems. It has to be structured in a way so that relational databases can talk to each other. Non-structured data can be accessed or queried very efficiently. All of the documents are stored in a hierarchy format so that everybody has access to them. And it becomes less about what the current technology environment is, and more about the structure long term, and thinking about the data and the ones and zeros really as an asset of the company, and how do we utilize that asset going forward. You have to protect it, and then B, you have to utilize it. And if you think about a return on value, if you have that, you need to be getting more out of your data than you're putting in. Having that mentality really kind of helps, regardless of what comes after AI or whatever it is. It needs to follow that same mentality of, if we're implementing it, we need to get more out of it than we're implementing. It can't just be a shiny new feature.
I love that. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So let me ask you, what advice would you give somebody coming into the field now, right? Into to IT?
Keep an open mind. It seems like AI is replacing a lot in technology, but there will always be the need for people to come up with that implementation strategy. It's very easy to come up with the ideas of, well, AI will replace this, AI can do this, AI can do that. But then there's, well, how do we get from start to finish? How do we get there? And if you're not in, if you're trying to get into an organization, think about the think about the strategy to implement your projects and how they benefit the company long term. It can't be a short term solution that solves a problem for a day. It should be something that solves a problem, but also provides value, either in terms of analysis or in terms of cost savings, or long-term strategic positioning. And all of that is so available in so much of the industry. On top of that, I think when you were just mentioning kind of that 70 developers at a company, 63 getting let go, to me, I'd look at that and go, so many of those developers will try and get right back in the same industry that's very crowded right now, and is kind of shedding people that technology people with technology degrees in technology are a dime a dozen. Looking at some of these other smaller industries that are construction particularly somewhat behind, and particularly residential construction, that are somewhat behind. There are very few rocks being thrown in that pond, so it's very easy to make a big ripple in that kind of environment, versus trying to make an impact somewhere like a development field in technology. It's just very crowded, and it can feel daunting and overwhelming. But coming to a field where they're typically a little behind, it doesn't take top tier skills to make an impact and wow somebody, and really have an impact on an industry or on a company as a whole. So
Well said. I think that is really sage advice for anybody looking to come into the industry. And I think that's just overlooked. I think it's a brilliant insight, and it comes from a guy who focuses on data, and that's just it's a great insight into what how the industry currently works and how you can use that to your advantage. So I think that was brilliant advice, and hopefully lots of people take heed and do exactly that. And I know it can be daunting and scary, but I think that is really that's going to be crucial to a lot of people's success, is going where others aren't. And that has been for businesses, as they start out. And I think people need to start thinking of themselves a little more like a business instead of an asset of a business. If you want to take that entrepreneurship kind of focus, but take it even further and look at yourself as a business. And then where can you go to provide the most value? Because that's really what it is. A business doesn't survive if they're not creating value. And an employee isn't going to survive well if they don't, if they're not constantly creating value. So to your point, where can you go to make the most impact? Where can you provide the most value? And a place that is underserved where you can go in and make a huge ripple. I think that's just brilliantly said. So well done. Thomas, this has been fantastic. But before we go, can you tell people where they can find out more about you and more about French Brothers Homes?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in looking for a home, FrenchBrothers.com, you'll find out more there. I'm available on LinkedIn at Thomas Berrington Innovates, LinkedIn/Thomas Berrington Innovates. I'd love to connect with everyone on the podcast. So thank you for having me on, Matthew. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being on. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.